Okay, what if I tell you that Jameson's newspaper headlines screaming about a vigilante in red and blue tights who terrorizes normal citizens is just a trifle compared to a straight-up environmental catastrophe that Spider-Man's activity may cause in New York? What if I tell you that in order to remove the organic web that Spider-Man leaves on New York's buildings, a whole separate department of city utility crews needs to be created that will require hundreds of thousands if not millions of dollars for its equipment and maintenance every day from the city budget? Since this utility service will have to clean an average of 8,000 buildings, yes, 8,000 daily from organic web. And trust me, it's much more than the average property damage the city incurs due to Pete's fights with villains. Yes, you may object by saying that organic web decays, let's say, within a week, as it was described in one of Marvel's handbooks, which relates specifically to comics. In the comics, Peter used to have bio-web shooters for some time too. I would object that, firstly, even if it decays in a week, it still does not take away from the fact that the city administration has to clean about 8,000 buildings daily, and secondly, in Sam Raimi's trilogy and in No Way Home, it has never been mentioned that organic web decays. Why does it have to decay at all? The relatively fast decay of the artificial web that we've seen in canon was a result of Peter's ingenious and target-oriented approach to creating his web shooters. Are you trying to say that Maguire's Pete's mutation turned out to be just so adaptive and advanced that it provided for a short period of decay for Pete's bio-web shooters? For example, the web and web weaver's layer from the boys has stayed there for weeks, if not years already. For some reason, I do not doubt it. In the wild, Spider's web is an extremely durable material and nothing happens to it without the influence of people or aggressive environmental factors. For instance, I've been cleaning the facade of my house lately, and I would say that even a high-pressure washer needs some time to remove the web. So what can we say about the web of a 167-pound Spider-Man? His web is supposed to be one of the most durable materials in Sam Raimi's universe, together with Doc Ock's face, of course. And considering the strength of his web, which only supervillains can overcome, imagine how hard it is for the police and other emergency teams to free criminals and vehicles from Pete's web. I'm afraid some grinder with a diamond disc or nippers simply won't cut it, pun fully intended. This also relates to the equipment of emergency teams that shall deal with removing Pete's web. By the way, shots like these prove once again that Pete's organic web does not decay in a short time, that is, in a couple of hours as in the 1990s cartoon series, but using artificial web as an example here, since emergency teams might not have enough time to safely bring down, for example, vehicles hanging over the street on the web, and so on. Okay, so it's time to move on to the part of the story where I'll tell you where the figure of 8,000 buildings marked by Pete's web in a day comes from. First of all, I shall highlight that all the statistics I'll cite further and prove together with you is, of course, tentative and of generalized character, which is actually true for most of the statistics, I guess. And if you want to comment that the author wastes time doing nonsense, you are more than welcome. Your comments and, of course, thumbs up is the best way to promote the channel. And from time to time, I will use footage not only from Sam Raimi's trilogy, if you don't mind, of course. Remember that we're still discussing Maguire's Spidey naturally. So, the first and the most important variable for our small study will be the time Peter spends as a Spider-Man. In order to assess this, let's take a closer look at the second part of the trilogy, where Pete faces certain personal and emotional problems, giving a fair share of his life to his red and blue alter ego. We know Pete is a gifted, disciplined, and focused guy, not like John Wick, but still. More than that, he even sleeps in a suit to always be ready to fight for justice. What I'm trying to say is that even if such a conscious person as Pete faces personal and household crises due to psychological conflict with his hero alter ego, it means he shall spend at least half of each day doing superhero stuff. This is 12 hours a day. To be honest, I think Pete spends way more than 12 hours a day on his hero activity, and 12 hours is our minimum, but let's take it as a basis. Now we need to further divide this time into actually combating crimes in New York and just patrolling the city. Yes, when we see stunning shots of Peter moving around New York locations, they are mainly just him patrolling the city. And you will be surprised, but I'm not including the time Pete spends fighting supervillains in our statistics. We know that during his career as Maguire's Spidey, he hasn't faced all that many of them, in fact, so percentage-wise this time is negligible. Facing supervillains is not a rule, but more of an exception for him. Alright, what else can we learn from the sequel? The fact that when Pete left for a temporary break, the crime rate in the city increased by 75%. Mathematically, it means that the crime rate in New York returned to its former level of 175,000 crimes a year. And this is, by the way, a real statistic of crimes in New York that we may find in the open sources. Probably not the last year's statistics, but we'll work with that. These 175,000 crimes a year include violent crimes, thefts, kills, criminal attempts, and so on. This means everything that is in the jurisdiction of such a hero who, unlike some of his colleagues, does not deal with legal issues. Which means, taking this into consideration, we understand that Maguire Spidey used to prevent 75,000 crimes a year. I could not find any information on how many crimes a year New York police prevents, just for an interesting comparison. If you have such info, please share it in the comments. Now, such a crazy level of efficiency, even half of that, would far outweigh all the property damage expenses. So, Spidey prevents 75,000 crimes a year, about 200 crimes a day on average, and he spends about 3 hours a day specifically on crime prevention. It was shown in the trilogy that he spends less than a minute to prevent each crime. Once again, we removed fights with supervillains from this selection. So what does Spidey do for the rest 9 hours of his shift? Right, patrolling and moving around the city. If we look closer, each transport cord moves Pete for 3 to 4 buildings at each side. Pete mainly moves along the streets, and the buildings are on both sides from him. That means he fixes his transport cords to 13% of the buildings he moves by. Yes, I understand that there are different buildings in New York, and yes, my wife still doesn't know what I'm doing here. But once again, let's think in terms of averaging and generalizing. And considering the time when Spidey moves along the streets of New York, what is the possibility that his transport cord sticks not to the facade of the building, but to the face of a random citizen who just decided to open a window or go out on a balcony to have a cup of coffee enjoying the sights of New York? Yeah, Maguire Spidey has the most advanced spider sense, almost at the edge of seeing the future. But what if we speak about other Spideys? Their sense may not be that reliable. Mathematically, the probability of force majeures with random citizens is very high. And what do you do with the buildings tiled with a lot of glass? Are they designed to withstand a load of a 167-pound man? Okay, I digress, although this is one more serious reason for Jameson's indignation. Another reason for Spidey's movement around New York is pursuits, and here Spidey fixes his web to almost every building he meets. He does it for ability to maneuver locally. Pete mainly hunts robbers leaving the crime scene. The share of robberies in the total crime rate of the city is 8%. This means he doesn't spend much time on pursuits, about 25 minutes daily. It takes Pete about a second to pass along one row of buildings, deducting the time for snack breaks, talking to Mary Jane, Aunt May, shaking sand from his clothes and other things. Spidey passes by 55,000 buildings during his 12-hour shift. This is about 5% of the total number of buildings in New York. For reference, there are about 1 million of them. So the average weighted percent of the buildings to which Pete attaches his transport cords is already 15, which gives us 8,000 buildings a day mentioned in the beginning of the video. Peter produces in total only about 155 miles of web for this. By the way, in the wild, spiders can also produce enormous amounts of web compared to their body size. Dude, you're literally more productive than any silk factory on Earth. Why do you need to deliver pizza once again? And yes, I'm still not buying the idea that Maguire Spidey's web has a period of decay of, let's say, a week. Again, why on Earth? His mutation already turned out to be too ideal compared to Webweaver. Should it, the mutation I mean, in addition have provided for not causing problems to the city? Okay, environmental catastrophe sounds like a bit of an exaggeration, but let's agree on a cosmetic catastrophe. Just imagine, given the above-mentioned data, after 4 months of Pete's activity, each building in the city will be marked with his web. Of course, we assume that Pete patrols different areas of the city every day. For example, to make a full circle of patrols around the city, he needs 20 days. And in less than 1.5 years, each building will be marked with his web 4 times. And the progression just goes further. Here we won't even take into account the webs left locally, like for example after a picnic with Mary Jane. And just imagine Jameson's face after he receives even the first check for cleaning the facade of the building. But one way or another, Spider-Man's story is not a story of a cosmetic catastrophe. It's a story teaching us that one person can change a lot of things. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to my channel and don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Bye!